Okay, so the lighting is not really good right now, but I don't really mind that because I kind of look like a mess. So I will be starting with On the Road, from John Hiruk, or however you pronounce the name. We I picked this book up when we were on the road to go to Big Sur together. So well, I picked it because I think the cover was nice and the and the guy was playing the guitar said it was a lovely book, and because well, it's one of the things we did together. I really want to also read this book for you. Okay, part one. I first met Dean not long after my wife and I split up. I had just gotten over a serious illness that I won't bother to talk about, except that it had something to do with the miserably where he split up and my feeling that everything was dead. With the coming of Dean Moratti began the part of my life you could call on the road. Before that I had often dreamed of going west to see the country, always vaguely planning and never taking off. Dean is the perfect guy for the road because he actually was born on the road. When his parents were passing through Salt Lake City in 1926 in a Jeepney on their way to Los Angeles. First reports of him came to me through Chat King, who'd shown me a few letters from him writing in a New Mexico reform school. I was tremendously interested in the letters because they so naively and sweetly asked Chet to teach him all about Nietzsche and all the wonder intellectual things that Chet knew. At one, at one point Carlo and I talked about the letters and wondered if we would ever meet the strange Dean Moriarty. This is all far back when Dean was not the way he is today, when he was a young Joe kid shrouded in mystery. Then news came that Dean was out of reform school and was coming to New York for the first time. Also, there was talk that he had just married a girl called Marlou. One day I was hanging around campus and Chet and Tim and Gray told me Dean was staying in a cold water pad in East Harlem, the Spanish Harlem. Dean had arrived the night before, the first time in New York, with his beautiful little sharp chick, Marlou. They got off the Greyhound bus at 50th Street and cut around the corner looking for a place to eat and went right in Hector's. And since then, Hector's cafeteria has always been a big symbol of New York for Dean. They spent money on beautiful big glazed cakes and cream puffs. All this time, Dean was telling Marlou things like this. Now, darling, here we are in New York, and I thought I haven't quite told you everything that I was thinking about when we crossed Missouri, and especially at the point where we passed the Boonville Reformatory, which reminded me of my jail problem. It is absolutely necessary now to postpone all those leftover things concerning our personal lovings, and at once began thinking of specific work-life plans, and so on in the way, and so on in the way he had in those early days. Sorry, my voice is absolutely horrendous, and I also know that he probably wouldn't use an accent like that. Okay, I can do this. I went to the cold water flat with the boys, and Dean came to the door in his shorts. Malou was jumping off the couch. Dean had dispatched the occupant of the apartment to the kitchen, probably to make coffee, while he proceeded with his love problems. For to him sex was the only and only holy and important thing in life, although he had to sweat and curse to make a living and so on. You saw that in the way he stood, bobbing his head, always looking down, nodding, like a young boxer to instructions, to make you think he was listening to every word, throwing in 1,000 yeses and that's right. My first impression of Dean was of a young Gina Autry, trim, thin-hipped, blue-eyed, with a real Oklahoma accent, a sideburns hero of the snowy West. In fact, he had just been working on a ranch at Walls in Colorado before marrying Milou and coming east. Milou was a pretty blonde with immense ringlets of hair, like a sea of golden tresses. She sat there on the edge of the couch with her hands hanging in her lap, and smoky blue country eyes fixed in a wide stare because she was in evil gray New York pad that she heard about back west, and waiting like a long-bodied, emancipated Mogali surrealist woman in a serious room. But outside of being a sweet girl, she was she was She was awfully dumb and capable of doing horrible things. That night we all drank beers and pulled wrist and talked till dawn. And in the morning, while we sat around dumbly smoking butts from ashtrays in, in the grey light of a gloomy day, Dean got up nervously, paced around thinking, and decided the thing to do was to have Malou make breakfast and sweep the floor. In other words, we got to get on the ball, darling. What I'm saying otherwise it will be fluctuating and the lack of true knowledge of crystallization of our plans. Then I went away. During the following week, he confided in Chet King that he absolutely had to learn how to write from him. Chet said I was a writer and he should come to me for advice. Meanwhile, Dean had gotten a job in a parking lot, had a fight with Milou in their Hookabun apartment, God knows why they went there, and she was so mad and so deep vindicate that she reported to the police some false, trumped up, historical crazy charge, and Dean had to lamb from Hoboken, so he had no place to live. He came he came right out to the Paterson, New Jersey, where I was living with my aunt. And one night while I was studying there was a knock on the door, and there was Dean, bowing, shuffling obsequently in the dark of the hall, saying, "Hello! You remember me, Dean Moriarty? I've come to ask you to show me how to write." "And where's Milou?" I asked. And Dean said that she apparently hoarded a few dollars together and gone back to Denver. The whore! So we went out to have a few beers because we couldn't talk like we wanted to talk in front of my aunt, who sat in the living room reading her paper. She took one look at Dean and decided that he was a madman. In the bar, I told Dean, "Hell, man, I know very well that you didn't come to me only uh, to want to become a writer, and after all do I really know about it except you got to stick with it with the energy of a bandy addict." And he said, "Yes, of course, I know exactly what you mean, and in fact all those problems have occurred to me. But the thing that I want is the realization of those factors that should go one depend on Schopenhauer's dichotomy for any inwardly realized, and so on in that ways, and so on in that way. Things I understood, not a bit, and he didn't, and he himself didn't. In those days, he really didn't know what he was talking about. That is to say, he was a young Joe kid all hung up on the wonderful possibilities of becoming a real intellect. And he liked to talk in the tone and using words, but in a jumbled way, that he had heard from real intellectuals. Although, mind you, he wasn't so naive that in all other things. And it took him just a few months with Carlo Marx to become completely in there with all the terms and jargon. Nonetheless, we understood each other on other levels of madness, and I agreed that he could stay at my house till he found a job, and furthermore we agreed to go west sometimes. That was the winter of 1947. One night when Dean ate supper at my house, he already had the parking lot job in New York. He leaned over my shoulders as I typed rapidly away and said, "Come, man, those girls won't wait. Make it fast." I said, "Hold on just a minute. I will be right with you as soon as I finish this chapter." And it was one of the best chapters in the book. Then I dressed and off we flew to New York to meet some girls. As we rode in the bus, in the weird phosphorescent void of Lincoln Tunnel, we leaned on each other with fingers waving and yelled and talked explicitly, and I was beginning to get a bug like Dean. He was simply a youth tremendously excited with life, and thought he was a con man. He was only cunning because he wanted to live and to get involved with people who would otherwise pay no attention to him. He was conning me, and I knew it, for room and board and how to write, etc. And he knew I knew this. This had been the basis of our relationship. But I didn't care, and we got along fine. No pestering, no catering. We tiptoed around each other like heartbreaking new friends. I began to learn from him as much as he probably learned from me. As far as my work concerned, he said, "Go ahead. Everything you do is great." He watched over my shoulder as I wrote stories, yelling, "Yes, that's right. Whoa, man, and phew," and wiped his face with his handkerchief. "Man, wow, there's so many things to do, so many things to write. How to even begin to get it all down and without modified restraints and all hung up like literary inhibitions and grammatical fears." "That's right, man. Now you're talking." And a kind of holy holy lightning I saw flashing from his excitement and his visions, which he described so torrently that people in buses looked around to see the overexcited nut. In the West he spent a third of his time in the pool hall, a third in jail, and a third in a public library. They'd seen him rushing eagerly down the winter streets, bareheaded, carrying books to the pool hall, or climbing trees to get in the attics of bodies where he spent days reading or hiding from the law. We went to New York. I forgot what the situation was. Two colored girls. There were no um, there were no girls there. They were supposed to meet him in a dinner and didn't show up. We spent we spent we went to his parking lot where he had a few things to do. Change clothes in the back in the shack in the back, and spruce up a bit in front of a cracked mirror, and so on. And then we took off. And that was the night Dean met Carlo Marx. A tremendous thing happened when Dean met Carlo Marx. Two keen minds that they are, they took to each other as the drop of a hat. Two piercing eyes glanced into two piercing eyes. The holy conman with the shining mind, and the sorrowful poetic conman with the dark mind that is Carlo Marx. From that moment I saw very little of Dean, and I was a little sorry too. Their energies met head on. I was allowed compared. I couldn't keep up with them. The whole mad swirl of everything that was to begin then, it would mix up all my friends, and I had left my family in a big dust cloud over the American night. Carlo told him of old Bull Lee, Elmer Hester, Jane, Lee in Texas growing wheat, Hassel on Rikers Islands, Jane wandering on Times Square in a Bedzarine hallucination with her baby girl in her arms and ending up in Bellevue. And Dean told Carlo of unknown people in the West like Tommy Shark, the club-footed pool hall rotation shark, and the card player and the queer saint. He told him of Roy Johnson, Big Ed Dunkel, his boyhood buddies, his street buddies, his innumerable girls and sex parties and pornographic pictures, his heroes, his heroines, his adventures. They rushed down the street together, taking everything in the early way they had, which later became so much sadder and perceptive and blank. But then they danced down the street like dingy doughies, and I shambled after, as I've been doing all my life after people who interest me, because the only people for me are the mad ones, the ones who are mad to live, mad to talk, mad to be saved, desirous of everything at the same time. The ones who never yawn, or never saying commonplace things, but burn, burn, burn like a fabulous yellow Roman candle, exploding like spiders across the stars, and in the middle you see the blue-centered pop, and everyone goes, "Ah, what did such young people in goofy Germany, wanting dearly to learn how to write like Carlo?" The first thing you know, Dean was attacking him with a great, amorous soul such as only a conman can have. "Now, Carlo, let me speak. Here's what I'm saying. I didn't see them for about 2 weeks, during which time they cemented their relationship to a fiendish all day, all night talk proportions. They came then came spring, the great time of traveling, and everybody in the scattered gang was getting ready to take one trip or another. I was busily at work on my novel, and when I came to visit the halfway mark after a trip down south with my aunt to visit my brother Rocco, I got ready to travel west for the first time. Dean had already left. Carlo and I saw him off at the 34th Street Greyhound station. Upstairs they had a place where you could make pictures for a quarter. Carlo took off his glasses and looked sinister. Dean made a profile shot and looked coyly around. I took a straight picture that made me look like a 32-year-old Italian who'd kill anybody who said anything against his mother. This picture Carlo and Dean neatly cut down the middle with a razor and saved a half each in their wallets. Dean was wearing a real Western business suit for his big trip back to Denver. He had finished his first fling in New York. I say fling, but he only worked like a dog in parking lots. The most fantastic parking lot attendant in the world. He can back a car 40 miles an hour into a tight squeeze and stop at the wall, jump out, race among the vendors, leap into another car, circle at 50 miles an hour in a narrow space, back swiftly into a tight spot, hump, snap the car with the emergency so that you see it bounce as he flies out, then clear to the ticket check, sprinting like a track star. Hand a ticket, leap into a newly arrived car before the owners have out, leap literally under him as he steps out, start the car with the door flapping, and roar off to the next available spot. Arc, pop in, brake, out, run, working like that without pause, 8 hours a night. Evening rush hours and after theater rush hours in greasy wino pants with a frayed fur-lined jacket, and beach shoes that flap. Now he had bought a new suit to go back in, blue with pencil stripes, vest, and all $11 on it, on Third Avenue, with a watch chain, a portable typewriter, which he was going to start writing in a Denver rooming house as soon as he got a job there. We had a farewell meal, all franks and beans in the Seventh Avenue Rikers, and then Dean got on the bus that said Chicago and whirred off into the night. There went our Wrangler. I promised myself to go the same way when spring really bloomed and opened up the land. And this was really the way my whole road experience began. All things that were to come are too fantastic not to tell. One half more page. Yes, and it wasn't only because I was a writer and needed new experience that I wanted to know Dean more, and because my life hanging around campus had reached the completion of its cycle and was stultified, but because somehow, in spite of our differences in character, he reminded me of some long lost brother. The sight of his suffering, bony face with the long sideburns, and his straining, muscular, sweating neck made me remember my boyhood in those dye dumps and swimming holes and riverside of Patterson and the Paese. His dirty work clothes clung to him so gracefully as though you couldn't buy a better fit from a custom tailor, but he only earned it from the natural tailor of natural joy, as Dean had, in his tresses. And in his excited way of speaking, I heard again the voices of old companions and brothers under the bridge, among the motorcycles, along the wash-lined neighborhood, and drowsy doorsteps of afternoon where the boys played guitars while the older brothers worked in the mills. All my current friends were intellectuals: Chad, the Nietzschean anthropologist, Karl Marx, Carlo Marx and his nutty surrealist low-voiced serious starring talk, Old Burley and his critical anti-everything drawl, or else they were slinking criminals like Elmer Hessel with that hip snare, Jay Lee, the same sprawled on the Oriental cover of her couch, sniffing at the New Yorker. But Dean's intelligence was every bit formal and shiny and complete, without the tedious intellectuals, and his criminality was not something that sulked and sneered. It was a wild, yea-saying overburst of American joy. It was Western, the West Wind, an ode from the plains, something new, long prophesied, long a coming. He only stole cars for joyrides. Besides, all my New York friends were in the negative nightmare position of putting down society and giving their tight bookish or political or psychoanalytical reasons. But Dean just raced in society, eager for bread and love. He didn't care one way or the other, so long as that I can get that little oligal with that slow slumping down there between her legs, boy, and so long we can eat, son. Hear me? I'm hungry, I'm starving, let's eat right now. And off we would rush to eat, whereof, as said Esclides, it is your portion under the sun. A Western kingman of the sun, Dean. Although my aunt warned me that he would get me in trouble, I could hear a new call, and see a new horizon, and believe it at my young age, and at a little bit of trouble, or even Dean's eventual rejection of me as a body, putting me down, as he would later on starving sidewalks and sidebacks. What did it matter? I was a young writer, and I wanted to take off. Somewhere along the lines I knew there would be girls, visions, everything. Somewhere along the lines the pearl would be handed to me.